Hi, this is part 2 of the watercolor rose video. We're just going to finish off our rose here. So last time you can see that I ended in the same spot. I have all these because it's been like a day. These are definitely dry. They also have a little bit of a texture to them, which is kind of actually fun. You can see how it makes the watercolors actually really cool later. So since everything is dry, we don't have to worry about the lines hitting each other. So we just want to get our stuff a little bit wet here. And once again, I'm just using red and some blue. So I got our brush loaded up. And we're gonna do probably this petal right here. And this one comes up actually over here a little bit and then goes over. I'm just kind of drawing our outline again and hitting that. It's always interesting when you draw how a lot of people need to do it exactly in its shape and form, but you kind of really lose a lot of the funness of drawing when you're trying to make everything as perfect as possible. So I got those. I'm going to touch those with some red. And just dabbing those in. And this actually has a little bit of red over here too. Wash off my brush a little bit. Grab some blue. I actually have another blue over here, so I'm going to use this one. Then I'm going to hit this little increase in here and just let that spread. I'm also going to hit that a little bit. And this, it does have a shadow like right here on there. So I'm actually going to also hit it right here. But once again, I'm moving my brush and then ending where I want. Wherever you dab obviously leaves a little bit of a watermark. And so you want to control your dabbing to force it to go where you want it to go and not just... sometimes it's okay to let it just play along, but you also want to be conscious of where your lines are so that it just doesn't look so muddy. And then I'm going to pull this out because this has a fun highlight right here. And I'm, once again, just dabbing my brush, even like squeegeeing it a little bit and hitting that. This one I kind of want to have just actually a little bit more red right here. So I'm going to hit this with just a touch more deep red. Just to have a good fun texture to it. Alright, we'll let that play out for just a second. And then we don't want anything hitting those. Got a little water on my screen. So we did this one. And we did these. So, well, it would be more like this one. So how about we do this one right here? Get some water in our brush and load our brush up. And this one, it doesn't have a lot of red in the top, so I'm actually going to hit the bottom right here with that deep red. And once again, watercolor a lot of times is about relaxing and having fun and learning how to use color and let the water flow together. So we want to make sure that we're having fun while we're doing this and not stress too much. This one does hit that spot right there, but I still want to get this in because I want to see how it affects my rose. So to keep it light, I'm just barely going to hit that. Hurry and fill that in so it's a lighter color. And you're like, oh no, it's touching. Yes, you want to avoid touching, but there are some spots you just can't help it, and you want to keep it. Drew in this highlight right here. There's where the light bounces off to hit that rounded edge, and it also has a rounded one up here. Once again, just dabbing off my brush so I have a clean brush, and then it goes from there. I'm gonna hit this with just a touch of red. And it's important, I said you don't have to be super detailed on things, but you do want to make sure you give that illusion of space and the depth of space. That's usually where people have trouble doing roses, is because they have a hard time conquering that depth of space. That roses have such a deep contrast to it, and if you don't give them that deep contrast, then they really don't look like roses. Okay, so let that one dry. There's this one that hits here, and then there's the bottom part of this one. That's really dark, so we want to give that a second. And while I do, I am going to touch this with a bit of blue, just to make sure we have a consistency of blue and red in all of our petals. Okay, so I'm probably going to do this one just because it gives us that space between those, and then we can come back and finish those. And once again, I'm not jabbing my brush straight down. I'm really hitting it and kind of on the side and going like that when I'm picking up my colors, because if you dab it down, you'll ruin your brush a little bit. Some brushes are sturdier than others, so it just depends, I guess, what kind of brush you have. And then I'm going to keep on going. Speaking of brushes, where I'm kind of just painting this in, there isn't a whole lot of difference between natural and synthetic fibers in brushes anymore. There's a few things that do better, but honestly, unless you're getting to the point where you are painting all the time, at that point, then if you're painting all the time and you want to just get one of each and see what kind. There are lots of different kinds of synthetic fiber brushes, and there's also lots of different kinds of natural ones. What I said, I believe, in the first video, if not, then I'll just repeat it. You really just want to make sure your watercolor brush, the most important thing is that it picks up the water, and that it also goes to a really tight point when you push those bristles together. And I'll show you here in just a second. Let me get this rounded corner in. Looks like someone beat up on this rose just a touch. It wasn't me, so. There we go. We got a nice color going on here. I'm going to pick up just a touch more color. I want these to be pretty juicy. And I want this to be a little juicier in this corner. And you're like, if you see these, so see how I have these spots here, these pretty, let me magnify just a touch. Sorry, my camera's just a little shaky. It's a new stand and it's driving me crazy. If you see these little dabs of color, you're like, oh, how do I fix those? They're not blending. You're just barely going to touch that with your brush and pick up that color. Then you can form it to whatever you want, because you already have the paint down. Now you're kind of pushing it around, almost like you would frosting a cake. Because you know when you frost cakes, how it has that a little bit of that push and that pull where you can kind of manipulate the frosting to go where you want it to. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, there are plenty of cake frosting videos on YouTube. And they're actually pretty interesting, the way they manipulate their frosting to go where they want it to. There's a delicate balance between being over controlling on your painting and redoing it again and again, and fixing it to where it's nice, but also not, I guess you just want to overwork your paintings a lot. And I find that stuff like this where it's wet and wet, if I'm excessively fixing it over 5 times, then it's me being very over controlling of it, and it's not sometimes always doing what I want it to do. So that's where you gotta just sometimes take a step back and look at where you actually want it to go and what's the most important thing. I do help at parties and stuff for my other job, and with that, we talk to a lot of clients about how they really need to pick what's the most important thing to them, and it will help them a lot to not stress so much about their wedding. And it's kind of the same thing in art. If you stress too much about everything, it kind of, I don't know, there's some people that pull it off really well, but you have to be very careful with it. If you are a little too over controlling of your painting, then it usually ends up getting muddy and overworked, and that's because you're redoing it and redoing it and redoing it. And when you're doing that with like colored pencils or graphite, you can kind of get away with that. When it comes to painting, sometimes you really can't. Oils are a lot more forgiving, but watercolors, because they're so fast moving and they're drying, you just gotta let them be sometimes, and let them be what they're gonna be. And it's all about the fun of it. It's kind of like when you do tie-dye. You can't really control all the tie-dye, but you still want to have fun with it. I find that if I'm overworking things about 5 or 4 times, then I am getting to that overworked stage, and that I just need to leave it alone. And I mean, when I mean 5 times, I mean like I fixed this probably about 3 times-ish. Not that I was like super counting, but if I'm over fixing it, then I'd go about a little bit more, and then I'm just pushing it back and forth, and you start getting frustrated with some things, and then your painting sometimes will show that you're frustrated. So anyways, lessons of life. Sometimes you don't take things too seriously. As I'm working on a camera that's jiggling around like nuts. I'm gonna hit this just a little bit more because this other one's so juicy. I want this one to be a little bit more juicy to match. And this one. And if you see, when I went in the second time and just barely hit those, they're dry enough that they kind of let me push the water around, but they also aren't so dry that it creates as much of a hardened line as they would if they were super dry. There's kind of different levels of dryness on those kinds of stuff, and just kind of watching your brushes and seeing how dry you want things to be. I can sharpen that up just a touch later. And see how this is kind of moved into this? That's okay, but I do want just a touch more of that red out there. And I'm just once again brushing my brush off on my paper towel and just kind of picking up some of that color. Okay, so while those are drying a little bit, we're gonna probably hit this little bit of this middle section rose, and I am gonna do just a touch lighter blue because I want to make sure, because this is such a tight area, I I want to kind of work out my drawing a little bit more than my other areas. And then I could push them darker just in a second. So here's that little petal. And then we're going to hit this one. And where I'm drawing, it's not necessarily the highlights. It's more of like these shadows, or where this section of light would be hitting that shadow. Because my color is blue, so it's just something to be conscious of. Sorry, I keep using conscientiousness. Okay, and then I'm going to hit these little shadows right here. Looks like this petal. This is where that little highlight we left out is going to hit that. And then just to kind of give myself a mark, I'm just going to kind of push in some of those shadows, not a ton. Alright, let's start with our red. And I'm swirling my brush. I'm not super jabbing it down into the bottom of the cup for actually two reasons. One, because I don't ruin my bristles. The second reason is actually because a lot of your brushes have a wood base right here. And if you put them too much into